Welcome to No Gray Areas. Today's guest, Brian Yates. Fascinating story. Let me just give you a teaser, okay? It has to do with all kinds of foreign countries, dogs, and bags full of money. You're not going to want to miss this story. Join us now. Well, Brian, welcome to the No Gray Areas podcast. So good to have you here. We've known each other for a couple of years now, but I didn't know until fairly recently you have a crazy complex story, right? Yeah. So let's jump into that a little bit, but I got it to just set it up. If any of our listeners have watched War Dogs, it gives a little glimpse of what your story is. Now, we're not going to jump into that part. I just captured their interest.
All right.
They're going to stay on to find out what that's about. But let me back up and go, where did you grow up?
So I grew up, was born and raised in Wisconsin, southern Wisconsin, lived on a farm.
Farm boy.
Oh, yeah.
So you know how to work.
I knew how to work. Yeah. Then it became an attempt and a trajectory of how can I work less.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, a lot of long summers back there.
Way back in my early 20s, I managed a cleaning crew, and as soon as I saw if anybody was trying to get hired, if they put on their resume that they were a farm boy, farm girl, whatever, they were immediately hired because they know how to work.
Baling hay, detasseling, shoveling manure, you name it.
Yep, you do it all.
That's right.
Okay, so you grew up farm boy. What were your dreams? What were your hopes? What did your parents want you to do?
My parents wanted me to get in trouble less. That's what they wanted.
A parent's dream.
Yeah, right. So
you sound like a parent's dream child.
Yeah, well, probably not always. I always had a draw toward law enforcement, and I was probably the poster child for ADD as a kid. I didn't have any crystal clear path to go on, but I was always drawn toward that. So
what was your favorite subject in school?
Gym. I mean, seriously. Yes. I mean, there's no.
I knew you were going to say that.
Sitting still and listening. I mean,
me too.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Difficult.
That's why I knew gym was going to be your favorite class.
100%.
You were like me. I would just sit there and watch and look up and be like half an hour to gym. And 2 minutes later, I'd look back up and it felt like it was another hour.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And when gym class ended, it was like the end of the world.
Yep.
Like I have to go back to that little prison.
Yes, it's true. It's true. Okay, so you're thinking you might want to be a cop. Your parents are just hoping you get in trouble less. So were you getting a lot of trouble in high school? Or was
the rambunctious, can't sit still, and that was in a much more conservative time, and so not sitting still in Sunday school was a big deal.
Yeah.
Not having that attention span was seen as problematic. So I was sent out in first grade for testing.
Yeah.
Testing. That's air quotes if you're not watching this on YouTube.
Did they find out anything in the air quotes testing?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, no pat on my own back, but I was way smarter than they all thought. Mm-hmm. And it was, it was literally just an inability to focus and sit still, and, little boys just getting dirty and breaking things and getting hurt. And, but that's what happens when you grow up on a farm.
Yeah.
I don't know what else they expected.
Yeah, exactly. So where did you go from there then?
So I did a short stint in college, and the university and I came to an agreement that I was better suited to do something else at the time. Not very different from my high school track.
I like how you put that, though. You and the university came to a mutual agreement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was all. I mean, you'll find out. I'm a know-it-all, and I have to be in. Well, it's funny because I was on. I think I got accepted on academic probation, and then after the first semester, they were like, "This isn't going well." So I think I just kind of mailed it in for the second semester, knowing that my path was going to quickly change.
Just really quickly, so similar story, but I back mine up. So we're almost like twins so far in life, I think.
Yeah.
I grew up way out in the country, learned all the work, but my sister was brilliant smart. She was 3 years older than me. So I went to a small school, but when I was in 8th grade, they put me in all these high school classes because they assumed I was like Becky McCullough. Well, a month into school, the administration and my parents came to a mutual understanding too. So very similar.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have this mutual understanding that you should do something other than school.
Right. And so I took a diversion and went to the military, spent 4 years in the Air Force, had an amazing experience. And
you like that?
I did enjoy it. And, looking back and we can get into this later as we talk about making decisions. I was anxious to get out. I was tired of the structure.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you that, because if you were someone that didn't like the structure of school, what was the difference with the structure of the military?
It was actually in the military, there was very little autonomy and very little responsibility in terms of, here's this book, go study it. It was none of that. It was, don't just tie your boots this way.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful for me.
Okay.
Because I couldn't screw it up. If you taught me the switch, I had to flip, and that's all I had to do. So, but I think that was very formative for me in terms of self-discipline and realizing that for me to gain some more responsibility and autonomy in my own life, I would have to be responsible, have some self-discipline. And so that absolutely changed my trajectory. When I got out of the military, I went back to school and was able to achieve some success. And so,
and the military helped you
absolutely
with what you needed to do. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
and as I look back, we what if all the time in our lives, wonder what it would have been like if I would have made a career out of that. But again, I think God moves in ways that redirects us, and I was not mentally fit to stay on that path at that time. And so I got out, went back to school, and, certainly don't regret any of that. But you always wonder, what would it have been like? Yeah.
So what did you go to school for then? Because I think you had said your undergrad was...
So I got an associate's degree in criminal justice, and then I got an undergrad bachelor's in organizational leadership.
So were you still thinking about going into police work? Is that why you did the criminal justice?
I did, and then I did. So I went into U.S. Customs and worked drug dogs for a few years.
Yeah. Now we're approaching the war dog part of this story, aren't we?
Yeah, we're getting there. So we're getting there.
So you see, I keep putting the hooks into the audience here.
Yeah, don't go away.
Yeah. So you're you get done with school, criminal justice, organizational leadership, and then you go right to working with U.S. Customs, specifically with drug dogs.
Correct.
You're training them?
Well, I was a handler, but you had to train your own dog. So typically you would go to the school for 3+ months and train a couple dogs, and the one you chose, you got to take back to work with you, and the other one would go out into the system for someone whose dog retired or they just needed an available asset.
Now, as people are going to learn, you're a little bit of an entrepreneur as well. So where did you start seeing that? Like, did you see that when you look back now in your life? Do you see that at a younger age, or did that really start developing at this time?
No, that's a really good question. Again, with an inability to focus, a lot of my pivots or change of directions were very sudden. I just want to do something different, so I'm going to do that. Yeah. But I think that's also in the entrepreneurial spirit, because when they see something they want to do, they just go after it. They don't necessarily build the best business case. They just they want to go rub two sticks together and see if they can make a fire.
They like to build planes while they're flying.
Absolutely. 100%. We'll pack the parachute on the way down. Don't worry about it.
Exactly.
Let's just go.
Exactly. So you look back on your life and you see a little bit of that in you.
Yeah. So as a child, spontaneity isn't best, but I think as you get older, it allows you to overcome some of those barriers of resistance and maybe some fears, and, let's just jump and see what happens, and feel like you have the confidence to kind of compensate if it doesn't go well on the landing.
Yeah. So how long were you working with the U.S. Customs?
For 4 years.
For 4 years.
Yeah.
Okay. And then where do you go from there?
So I actually had a break-in service. I worked in Chicago and Los Angeles, and I had a break-in service in there. So it was a total of 4 years. But on the break, it was partially a family decision to not work the shifts and the types of things that came with it. I went out and, worked in corporate America, worked as a financial advisor's assistant, did some other things, then went back into customs. And then, shortly after 9/11, started to realize while I was working with dogs again, that at some point, the need for bomb dogs is going to become a commercial application, not just the government.
This is where your entrepreneurial spirit is coming
right.
Yeah.
So I, met up with a buddy, and he and I ended up becoming business partners, and, started an organization that provided bomb dogs to the military.
Yeah.
And, we worked exclusively with the Department of Defense across all branches of the military, doing odd jobs in odd places.
So and when you say odd jobs in odd places, okay, unpack that a little bit for us, because I know you've told me some stories, and I'm like, some people may be going like, okay, so you were traveling around the U.S. in different states?
Yeah, no. So, and I want to preface this because I've watched a lot of podcasts, and I've seen some really cool, documentaries on people's stories. And let me just start by saying there's nothing special about me. Like I'm not some cool whiz bang stud like you see a Jocko Willink or the guys from War Dogs, although I think they may have been as limited in their brain width as me.
Yeah, that's part of their story.
But a lot of my career was being at the right place at the right time and being surrounded by really good people. And so my business partner and I, found an opportunity. We were awarded the first bomb dog contract for Baghdad International Airport. And it was just one guy with 2 dogs so they could rotate them. And my partner went over and started working it. And that was the airport where all the military units were coming in and out of.
This is after 9/11.
Right. Oh, yeah. This is right after we took over control of the airfield. And when the military units would come through, knowing that they had their own deployable canine units that were in the rear with the gear, they approached my partner and like, can you guys outsource to us? And, well, we sure can.
Yeah.
And
glad you asked.
And it literally, pardon the pun, it blew up. Like in we went from about end of 03 to about the end of 07. And we went from one guy with 2 dogs to over 120 dog teams with about 170 dogs in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Wow.
And it was, force protection, working entry control points to, major bases or resources, all the way up to including going outside the wiring, going on missions, and doing things that the military dogs would typically do for themselves, but they did not deploy those assets. So again, right place at the right time, and it was really nutty. It was the Wild Wild West, just like the movie War Dogs. Now you're being brought into the story here for those listening. There was no roadmap on how to do that, and the government is dictated by the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and they just completely threw that out the window. They needed to get assets and resources in place to do a job and do it now. And so all of the typical solicitations and, RFP processes, and that just didn't exist early on. To include, they could not conduct an electronic funds transfer, meaning they couldn't wire you your pay. So we got paid in physical cash. So you're getting, and it's all documented, and it was all above board and traced from their finance office all the way to our bank. But they would just slide
pile
7 figures at you every month, and you were responsible for getting it deposited in your account and paying your people. So it was really unprecedented.
So you're flying around with that kind of cash.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and early on, I've got pictures when I first got there. I'm wearing like a flannel jacket with like some old Western drop holster, with jeans. It just looked like this ragtag. We look like a bunch of hillbillies, let's be honest. And then over time, we were able to develop contracts with, gun manufacturers and armored vehicles and things like that. But early on, we just looked like a bunch of trash with cash rolled into town to do this job, and right alongside with the troops. And it was a really neat time, and super blessed to have been able to do that.
Yeah. So tell us one of the crazy stories that you have of just when you're talking about like the Wild Wild West, and you guys are just trying to figure it out. And
there was kind of a string of events. So to that kind of unregulated side of it, when you first got over there, we were sanctioned to be armed, to have armored vehicles, to do a lot of the things that you would need to do in that position. And this is State Department, Department of Defense. It's all authorized. But they didn't have the ability to give that stuff to us. So early on, it was up to us to go find our own weapons and to go. So, there were times when, we were buying, we were doing, what do they call them, straw sales in the U.S., like locally, and it was sanctioned, but you're buying weapons off the local market so that you can perform for the Department of Defense. And it just seemed so odd that they couldn't, do that for us. But again, there was no book, there was no right or wrong. They hadn't been in that environment before. And I guarantee you now, when the next conflict comes up, they'll be a little further down the road, and they'll be able to introduce, third parties a lot more effectively. But, and it was not uncommon to be contacted by the FBI, the DOJ, or another agency that either got wind of, our massive cash transfers, or, someone that, maybe used to work for us or used to work for a sister company would go back and, lodge a complaint. So they would come looking, and they would be shocked at what they would find and be like, you're not talking to your own people down the hall. The FBI wanted to know, why are we taking all this cash in? I'm like, well, because you're giving it to us, not you specifically, but your brother.
Yeah.
So it was chaotic and fun, but there was no real methodology of getting through it. You were just navigating as best you could, going at high full speed.
Okay, so tell us best day and worst day in that time period for you.
Well, without question, the worst day was when I remember a Navy E5 walked into our office, introduced himself, and said that he was there to do a troop to task ratio, which immediately those of us that have been in the military and those of us that have been working with contracts for a while knew the writing was on the wall. The military is going to insource this. They're going to start deploying all those assets they have around the world for this very reason, now that they understand they're going to be there long term. We were kind of a stopgap and a short-term fix. But we had long-term contracts, and like I said, they did not honor the federal acquisition regulation, so they decided when it was time to pull the plug that we would just go away. And that conversation, I know right where I was sitting, I remember that guy's face very vividly, and that was bad. But
that would be similar. That would be similar if someone had built a business and it is growing, and you're sitting in a room and they basically destroying the whole thing, right? Like the whole thing's going to fall apart.
Right.
Yep. That was a bad day.
Yeah, that was a bad day. And we actually had a number of good days. So again, kind of in an unprecedented way, and not any pat on my back, but just a tribute to the great people we had working for us. We were credited by specific military units with finding someone that was on the FBI list, by sourcing materials that was ultimately owned by high value targets over there. And as civilians, that was pretty cool. Like, you go into the chow hall and you're rubbing shoulders with guys that are kicking the dirt every day in uniform, and that's what their expectation is. But for us to be able to participate in something like that, and another really cool story is, if you remember back in the news when all the people had the purple ink on their fingers saying that they had just voted. They had the first big kind of Democratic vote. And the day before, we were out searching several of the polling facilities, and one of those facilities was a school, and we found a locker that was rigged full of explosives. So there's a lot of those stories out there from our company and from a lot of others that had done really, really good things. But in the fog of war, nobody sits around and, gives you the golf clap or, does anything else. It's just, you're over there, you get paid well, and you're there to do a job, and you do it. But that was exciting. It was just neat to be a part of something like that, knowing that history was being written.
It was a massive event in that country, and you guys were part of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Really cool.
How many, at the height of it, how many dogs did you say you guys had? Did you train?
We had 120 handlers under contract. So typically you'd have, I think the ratio is 1.5 or 1.7 dogs. So basically you have to have enough dogs in the kennel so that dogs goes down, it needs to see the vet, or, a dog can only work so much time during the day. So you have to adjust. So it wasn't quite 2 dogs to 1, but I'd say at one point we probably had 170 or 180 dogs in the kennels.
And that's over there, or like where were your kennels?
So we were all over the place. We had a breeding facility down in South Africa that was, supposed to be a long-term project of, instead of buying all these dogs from Europe, being able to produce our own. We had a training facility in the Midwest.
That E5, that your worst day.
Yeah,
just describe.
I'm sure he knew. I think he knew. He woke up, I'm going to teach you civilians something.
Yeah.
No, but yeah. So I mean, we really had dogs all over the place. The first time I ever took dogs in, we flew into Amman, Jordan, and literally hired like taxi drivers with Suburbans, and we crated in 8 dogs, and there were 5 or 6 of us. So we had to drive from Amman, Jordan to Baghdad. Terrible idea. I mean, talk about bad decisions, which is a great segue.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. You look back on stuff like that, and, we all did it as kids. Like, how did we survive? I don't know how that worked, but I look at a lot of the stuff that we got into as adults, and it's amazing.
How many years were you involved in that? You said, was that around 2003 you started?
03 to 07. Okay. Yeah. Then, again, you meet people at the chow hall, you meet people on an airplane, you meet people at an airport in that kind of industry. And so then as we were closing that down, I pivoted and got into executive protection.
Okay.
And then ultimately worked with a client in the Middle East that was part of a royal family for on and off for about 2.5 years, and ran his dignitary protection detail.
Yeah, which was no small deal.
Yeah.
Executive protection, but you were literally doing that.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, in a big way. I suppose you have some great stories, but maybe you can't tell them.
A lot of that's covered by confidentiality agreements.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it was nuts. I mean, the amount of wealth there is unbelievable. And you and I have spoken before, one of the big takeaways was, my adjusting my perspective. I really do value now all the time that I spent internationally, because it did teach me other perspectives. The way other people view the U.S. isn't as great as I once thought it was. But probably most importantly to my faith and to my life was the way that in the U.S. we don't deal with royalty. The Queen just died and it was on the news, and it's kind of a sexy story for a while, but nobody really understands what royalty is. And so having had the privilege to work in that environment, it really reframed how I see Jesus as king.
I love that, because we talked about this before, but as being two men of faith, and we believe the biblical narrative it's about a kingdom. That's what you're talking about, right? It's not about a democracy.
Right.
It's about a kingdom, and a kingdom has a king. And you're saying one of the things you learned as you were working in and something that's similar, a monarchy, you're seeing the difference between that and a democracy. What were some of the differences, and what do you mean how that helped you understand your faith more?
So probably the best way I can describe it isn't so much my engagement with the royal member. I had a great relationship with him, and he taught me some great things, some things to do, some things not to do. But I had a great relationship with him. But what was probably made the biggest impression on me was watching the people around him that either grew up in that monarchy or near it, or people that had been in his, in his employ for a long period of time, and seeing the way they spoke about him, seeing the way they interacted with him. There's a level of reverence. There's a level of respect that goes far beyond agreeing with everything that someone says. And it just, I spoke on this one time, and really there was an event where I got to watch a lot of his personal staff kind of scurrying around one night. And it's something that you see every day. And one particular night I remember seeing that. And then later on by myself in my hotel room, I don't know if God spoke to me or if this was just a new realization, but why don't I treat Jesus like that? Like these, kind of air quotes servants, but whether they're professional staff or, other people on my team that are providing security, but you see other of his family members come in, and the way that they interact with him, and again, it's the way they talk about him with such reverence. And even though sometimes maybe personally he wasn't a person to be revered, but his position was. And understanding that we talk about Jesus as king, but certainly in my life, I've not treated him as king now the way I've seen other people treat royalty. And I think that's a big gap.
Man, it's such a powerful point, because probably most of the listeners here that grew up in America in a democracy or a republic, and it is different. We wouldn't understand a monarchy. In fact, when I read about it, sometimes it's so foreign to me. I'm like, I'm not bowing down to anybody type mindset, right?
Right.
But when you actually live in and experience a monarchy up close, like you did, there are principles that you learn that you could really apply, right? Like I love what you're saying. You saw all these people scrambling around to serve him just simply because of his office.
Right.
Yeah. But again, what we would believe as being men of faith is that he doesn't just hold that office; he actually lives it out, better than anyone has.
Right.
Like
no, 100%. There's good kings and bad kings.
Yeah. But we serve a good king.
Right.
But man, that's so great. So, man, you've had what an interesting life you've had, and what are some of the lessons you've learned? Like, let me just back up a little bit. As you know, I shared a little bit about where this podcast came from, and it's tied to No Gray Areas and this story, the biggest sports scandal that they know of. And two guys, especially, their life, there was actually more than two, but the two main characters in the story, it changed their life forever. They made a decision in their 20s that they both made because they started stepping into some gray areas, and it still affects them to this day. But the truth is none of us get through this life without some mistakes, right? So what are some of the mistakes that you've made? What are some things that you've had to correct? How would you suggest we lead ourselves through our mistakes and our failures?
I always describe myself as just a dumb farm kid from Wisconsin. Like, I have had some amazing supervisors and mentors and coaches in athletics that really were the most powerful impact on my mindset. And I had a supervisor one time in law enforcement that just asked me the question, if you're wrong, do you want to know? And to me, the value in that is, you've gotten to know me a little bit. I'm not just an A personality. I'm like a triple A personality. And along with that comes, I have to be right. This is self-motivated. And there's obviously some arrogance and pride that gets in the way for sure. But it's this drive and this motivation that I have to be right. I have to get it done. I have to do it the best. And in that mindset, a lot of times there's a barrier to looking at other ways of doing things. And so, I could list off, hundreds of mistakes that I've made, but I think the most powerful thing where I can share in where you're going with this is, if you're wrong, do you want to know? And the answer should be yes, right? But pride and other things get in the way. And more than anything, I think back to the point of kind of kingship, Josiah is one of my favorite stories in the Bible because he was a young king and he thought he was doing it right. He was doing what his father had told him to do, and he had surrounded himself with what he thought were really good people, and he thought what he was doing was right. And then some of his spiritual leaders uncovered some old texts that he had not read and had not been read to him. Now, all of a sudden, where he thought he was doing things right just got expanded, and he realized he was wildly off course. And so kind of in that vein of, I think Stephen Covey, and probably now a million people have said it, but seek to understand and then be understood. And, as I got further into my career, if someone in my employ would come to me with a question, my first question is, how long do I have to answer this? Because I can make really good decisions based on the information I have right now, but I might not have all the information. And so it's asking better questions. I went to graduate school and thought I was going to come out of there with all the answers. Absolutely not. I probably came out of there more confused, but I did learn how to ask really good questions. And so I wish
such an important part in life, isn't it?
Yeah. And I wish going back now to, go through the catalog of mistakes and bad decisions. I wish I hadn't been in such a rush all the time to come up with that right answer. And to,
where do you think that comes from for us? I think most people that are in a leadership position, all of us at some point are leading something. Some people may say, well, I'm not a leader, but you're a parent, so you are leading.
Sure.
But where do you think that comes from, where we are pretty quick to try to have an answer? We don't ask the right questions. Where's that come from?
Well, I'm sure you can appreciate this. When you're baling hay and Grandpa says, go grab another one, you don't ask questions. You go do it.
It wasn't Grandpa, it was Dad. It was Dad. In fact, my dad was like, I shouldn't have to ask you to do that. You watched me pick up 2 pieces of wood to cut it, figure it out, and pick it up next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I do think that there's a compulsion there to be right. And maybe a different way of saying this is just be sure you have as much information as you possibly can as you make that decision. I've had the privilege to work with some younger folks that are getting married or getting ready to have kids or changing jobs. And, we tend to be an impulsive people, I think, in America especially. And, I think of the guys involved in this movie and this project, a lot of times you're, ending up somewhere very dangerous and with those heavy, heavy consequences wasn't a decision you woke up one morning and decided, you know what, I want to risk going to prison for the rest of my life. Nobody wakes up and decides that.
Yeah, you're so right.
And it's 1,000 decisions between here and there. And maybe at times there's an inclination to, take higher risks or maybe work outside the rules a little bit. And if you take that one step and you're successful and then you keep going down that path, then the consequences just build and they get bigger.
Yeah, and what I love about it, I remember reading a quote years and years ago, indecisive leadership is an oxymoron. And I agree with that. I think that as leaders, you have to make decisions. But what you're saying is sometimes pausing before you make that decision, sometimes giving it 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever you can do, asking some other questions so you have more information. That's not indecisiveness. That's just wisdom, right?
Right. Again, every time you're posed with a decision to make, how long do I have? Is this problem still going to be here in the morning? Can I tackle it then?
Yeah.
I love sleeping on big decisions. And if you can't, make the best decision that you can with the information you have right now. And, for me, it was, don't let my pride get in the way. Is there something I'm not considering? Or is there a way I could go get information, even if that means I got to go ask Pat, and then it's going to look like I'm not as smart and I'm asking for help. And, meekness is not weakness.
Yes.
And that idea of, as a leader, servant leadership, if you're always the smartest guy in the room, chances are everyone in your organization is going to take on that same personality and feel like they have to be the smartest guy in the room.
Yep. And then you just have a room full of know-it-alls that aren't asking good questions.
Right.
Yeah. Great point. Yeah. I think along those lines, one of the things that I'm learning in life too is when I feel an emotion like anger, like something made me angry, if I just wait 24 hours. Now, I may still come up with the same solution that I had when I was really angry and I first heard it, but at least it's given me time to process it, and I'm not just doing it out of a stupid emotion.
Right. Choosing to respond instead of reacting.
Yeah. I think, too, that sometimes, especially for younger leaders, the mistake we make is I feel like if I'm leading something, I have to have all the answers. And you got to let go of that. That's a fallacy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I've also learned, and I didn't do this earlier in life, but I've also learned a lot more when I have people come to me with a question. Instead of just giving a solution, I say, what do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think we should do, right? And they will often come up with maybe what you were going to do or maybe a better idea.
Yeah, I think that's, early on, like in total quality management and some other more, as inclusivity became, a more popular term. And as you look at it in business and even in family environments, my idea plus your idea usually equals a better third idea. And working internationally, I'll be honest, I remember going over to Asia, to the Middle East, Africa, and just having this sense of, nobody's better than America. And so nobody's better than an American, me. And learning so many great things from some of the most humble, simple people that were just really good at doing life.
Yeah.
And some of those bad choices in my life, were, I think, helpful in chipping away at that pride and at that stubbornness and at that impulsiveness to got to be right, got to answer right now, got to be the smartest guy in the room. And you take some lumps like that after a while, and then you start, taking before I shoot myself in the foot. Let me,
what you're saying though, Brian, I think is so good, because the truth is that our strengths can become our weaknesses, right? And clearly from your story, one of your strengths is you're a driver type personality. You're going to figure it out. You're going to, and God kind of wired you that way, but that can also get in the way. That can also turn into pride. That can also turn into arrogance. So it's like it was a strength of yours, but in life you've had to learn how to not let that strength become a weakness. Is that,
right?
Am I?
No, I think
that well?
I think that's absolutely, I was wired with that. And then I think it became a weakness. And I think based on being around really good people have showed me how that can be a tremendous strength.
Yeah.
But getting it done and getting it done right doesn't always mean getting it done right now.
Yeah.
It's seeking more counsel, it's seeking more information, and then doing a really good job with it down the road versus, the old, better to measure 10 times and cut once than measure once and cut 10 times.
I feel like my dad told me that a few times when I cut something wrong. It took me a long time to learn that one. Like I was well into my 40s, I think, before I learned that one, because even when I've taken the strength finder test, activator is one of my top strengths. So when should we start? Yesterday.
Right.
So I don't want to measure twice, much less 10 times.
Absolutely.
Man, you learn the hard way in life.
Yeah.
I used to think that I'd lose my man card if I read a manual or instructions.
Right.
But now I go, man, I'm saving
I go get my readers and I put them on.
By the time I learned that I should read the manual, I have to wear readers.
That's exactly what it is, too. Sometimes that age equals wisdom.
Yeah, but that's good. That's good, though. That's because, it can go the other way.
Yep.
Age doesn't automatically mean wisdom.
Right.
It's age with actually humility and recognize you're a lifelong learner, because we know a lot of old people that are really still dumb and foolish,
right?
right? Ignorant.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So spiritual Jesse James, you've used that phrase to describe you. What does that mean?
I think because of my rambunctious childhood, and I have always been, I love interacting with people, but I've always been a loner in the sense that I'm okay just running this one solo. I don't always have to be engaged with other people. And I think that combined with a little bit of recklessness along the way, I can remember a time when, faith was really important to me. We were going to have this conversation and you were going to figure this out because I know the right answer. And I think that caused a lot of damage, and that was part of that, shoot, ready, aim versus learning to do it the right way.
Yeah.
And so I think the spiritual Jesse James is just this image of this just kind of chaotic, bold, just reckless person kind of running around town. And I think I've been like that at times, but out of God's grace, allowing consequences to be the greatest teacher of all time, and learning how to temper that down a little bit, and keeping some of the boldness and the confidence and the drive, but recognizing that 10 people sitting around a table, they're all looking at that table 10 different ways.
Yeah.
And valuing that and learning to seek to understand and then be understood.
Instead of just going, there's 9 of them that are wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think you've answered this somewhat, but let me just pretend for a moment. Imagine that there's a time machine behind you and you get to go climb in it.
Ooh.
And you get to go back to 18-year-old Brian and you have 60 seconds.
Oh.
What would you say to him?
That's brutal. I'd rather eat hot wings. Yeah, I would, slow down. Slow down, be more calculated, and truly all the things God's gifted you with, don't run ahead of it. And I feel like that's something that I did very poorly, probably still do this day at times. But yeah, I would just coach myself that you can reduce regret, you can reduce consequences, and make more effective decisions if you'll just, I have this image of, we go up to God and we want something and our hands aren't open to get anything. And so, it's, hey, just have that posture of needing, seeking, and accepting that help that you need.
What do you think 18-year-old Brian would say back to you?
He would make an obscene gesture and he would say things that you would bleep out on this podcast. I think, honestly, that's a fair question, because I really think it would be, no, I've got this.
Yeah.
That has been a posture most of my life. No, I got this all figured out. So even trying to convince myself, getting out of the time machine with Bill and Ted, trying to convince young Brian that there's a better way to do things, it would have been tough at that time. Yeah. But I also do think, going back to mentors, like, my trajectory I would have just continued to stumble and fall if it weren't for really good people in my life saying, hey, have you ever thought about doing it this way?
Yeah. We've been doing this podcast for a little over a year now, and I would say if I had to say a consistent message we've heard throughout, this would be one of them, is the importance of mentors. Just over and over again, people, as they look back on their life, for good or bad, they'll say sometimes, like, I didn't have good mentors in my life. Or others would be, well, a lot of the reason I'm where I'm at today is because of good mentors. Isn't that interesting that seems to be a theme?
It's easy for me to say because, like I've said before, I'm not that special. Now I've just become this vehicle for other people's good ideas and for the wisdom that other people have given me, either through consequences or just them taking the time to share their wisdom with me. And so, whatever your bandwidth is, if you're collecting really good, positive, wise things in that, you're going to become that person. You're going to become that mentor. And it's easy to, who is your greatest coach or who is your greatest mentor? Now, what do you need to do to emulate them? Well, you have to pick up along the way the same wisdom that they have.
Yeah. Man, thanks so much for being with us today. How would people get a hold of you? If someone wanted to learn a little bit more about you or connect to some of the things you're involved in, what would they do?
Yeah, so I've got my hands in a lot of different things, but in the vein of still kind of the executive protection, dignitary protection, international travel kind of thing, I do have a company called Vensonder, VENNSONDER.com. And it's just a home page of the form, and you can submit questions there if you have some interests. But otherwise I'm running in a lot of different directions, and that's the one thing that will always be near and dear to my heart. And I feel like, I may not always be the best answer for people, but I have a good network where I can connect people to that.
Yeah. You still have that entrepreneurial spirit, won't you?
That's right.
You'll have that to the day you die.
That's right.
Get that. All right. So, one of the things we do on No Gray Areas, which is fun, is 2 truths and a lie. The irony of it, no gray areas. I'm going to ask you to lie to me. We've been listening as an audience to you for about 40 minutes, gotten to know you a little bit. So now we're going to see if you can stump us.
Okay.
Stump me.
Yep.
2 truths and a lie.
I have explored the pyramids. I have canoed in the canals of Italy. And let's throw out, I have floated in the Dead Sea.
Ooh. This is tough because you just got done telling us, and I know this about you. You've been all over the world. Pyramids, canals of Italy, Dead Sea. Pyramids are true.
That is true.
Okay. All right. Now I got a 50-50 chance. I'm going to say you floated the canals of Italy.
I did not.
You didn't. Okay. Let me tell you why I did. This is my deductive reasoning. You've been in some countries where I assumed you weren't allowed in Israel because your passport would have been stamped that you were in these other countries. So,
I was on the Jordanian side of the Dead Sea.
So I was thinking correctly.
Yeah. No, actually, it's funny that you say that, because there was a period of time when I traveled so much, my passport was full. I had to send it in to get extra pages, and all of those got full. But most of them were from Islamic countries. In fact, my visa to Pakistan says the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
Yeah.
So there was no going to
you're
Israel.
not getting, when you land in Tel Aviv, they're not letting you in.
Yeah.
So can I say that I was 50% right?
Yeah. I mean, and you were on the right thought process.
We both had the same schooling experience. So give me that.
That's right. Absolutely.
Give me a
C's get degrees, buddy.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So I was thinking correctly.
Yeah.
When you said floating the Dead Sea, I was like, there's no way he could have gotten into Israel. You didn't. You
Nope.
the Jordanian side.
That's right.
I've always wanted to go to that side. So I floated in the Dead Sea as well, but I'm just looking over at those.
Oh, wow.
Those
really surreal down there, because it's at the basin and you got the mountains and everything's so quiet. But Jordan was cool because of Petra and, the baptism site of Jesus.
Petra. Yeah, that's where, for the listeners, that's where the city's like built right into the wall,
right
into the wall of the cliffs.
Yeah.
Yep. And then it's like this, talk about a defendable place.
Oh, yeah.
Like everybody had to funnel through.
Yeah, these old ravines, I'm sure, caused by water at some point. And yeah, it's a tough walk down and out. And
you doing international security, you were probably looking around going, this would be a perfect place if you had to defend, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, you got me. That was good.
Yeah.
That was a good one. All right. Well, thanks so much, man. We really appreciate it. Appreciate the lessons that you shared with us. And I hope the audience and myself that we take it to heart. So thanks, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Pat.
Thanks so much for joining us on No Gray Areas. Brian Yates was amazing, wasn't he? My big takeaway was when he said you have to get it done, but you don't have to get it done right now. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is pause and wait. So question for you, when in your life do you need to sometimes just hit the pause button? Comment below, like, share, and subscribe. No Gray Areas.